So, the AUG. For the few of you who have watched my other breakdown videos, it should be no surprise that I personally have an affinity for scoped assault rifles, namely the SG-553. Nowadays, it seems the SG is more or less accepted within the current competitive meta. Obviously, it's still nowhere near as popular as the AK-47, but I've definitely begun to see more people trying it out. That, unless people scream at me for picking one up. But what about the counter-terrorist equivalent with the AUG? Besides enjoying a brief spike in popularity way back in the overpowered offensive days, currently the weapon seems to be a rarely used commodity in competitive matchmaking. Although the AUG has recently seen a resurgence in usage via casual, it was rather short-lived, as people seemed to immediately drop the gun as soon as they completed the corresponding breakout mission. So that begs the question. Is the AUG really as useless as people think it is? Well, thanks to the old Call of Duty gun stigma, among other things, it seems like the majority of CSGO players seem to actively avoid using the AUG, and as such, most players tend to know very little about its actual weapon statistics. In fact, did you know that the AUG is the most accurate gun in CSGO? Now, before we get into the bulk of the breakdown discussion, as usual, I won't be presenting all of the weapon statistics, but just the ones that I consider to be important and/or interesting. Again, this is to provide context to my later discussions, as well as perhaps informing players on a few interesting weapon statistics. So, to begin with, at $3,300, the AUG is the most expensive assault rifle in CSGO, available exclusively for counter-terrorists. Don't worry, as biased as I am towards scoped assault rifles, I will explain later on how the AUG's pricing affects the weapon's competitive usage, so don't sweat it at the moment. Anyhow, as CSGO's most expensive assault rifle, it's rather surprising that the AUG actually sports the lowest raw damage per bullet out of all the other assault rifles in the game. But don't let that dissuade you just yet. It does make up for the low raw damage by containing the second highest assault rifle penetration, at 90% AP. If you've somehow managed to accidentally watch my other breakdown videos, by now I must sound like a broken record, as you probably know as well as I do of the importance and effectiveness that higher armor penetration has over flat raw damage. Factoring in armor penetration, in addition to some other relevant modifiers, the AUG's damage per second against armor actually increases to the second highest among all assault rifles in CSGO. In fact, the AUG's 90% armor penetration, among other things, makes it the only CT assault rifle capable of performing a one-shot kill to helmeted enemies. Admittedly, while its one-shot lethality is nowhere near the distance of the AK or the SGs, it's definitely better than nothing. I still think it's ridiculous that most eco-round pistols have better one-shot lethality than CT rifles, but that's a rant for another day. Anyhow, unlike armor pen values, the AUG has a relatively average base rate of fire, moderate mobility, and middling recoil, being slightly more accurate while spraying as it does contain the lowest assault rifle inaccuracy from firing. However, while scoped, the AUG's fire rate and mobility are reduced, but fortunately so is its recoil, as when scoped it becomes the lowest recoil amount for automatic rifles. Unfortunately, the AUG also hosts the longest assault rifle reload time at 3.8 seconds. Then again, things do start to look better within the scope of weapon inaccuracy statistics. As you can see, the AUG almost has the best standing and crouching statistics, being only second to that of the SG-553. But if we take a look at the scoped standing and crouching inaccuracies, the AUG actually beats the SG-553 in addition to every other weapon in the game. That's right, while scoped, the AUG is more accurate than even the AWP, which is credited as the most accurate sniper rifle in the game. For those of you wondering why that even matters, I should explain that unlike 1.6, all weapons in CSGO suffer from some form of first shot inaccuracy. To put it simply, this means that where you aim is not always where your bullet goes, as every shot contains a small cone of bullet deviation that increases the further away you are from your target. If you'd like a more in-depth and succinct explanation on first shot inaccuracy, I encourage you to check out DevinTV's video on the subject, linked in the comment box below. Anyways, for the most part, the AUG is the closest weapon in CSGO to achieve a perfect 1-to-1 precise shot ratio, which again becomes ever more prevalent when engaging targets at longer ranges. With that said, how does one effectively use the AUG? In general, I like to use the AUG as I would the SG553, with a few minor adjustments. That is to say, that the AUG excels as a mid to long ranged assault rifle, based on its statistics and the important addition of that tactical scope. Now, while the AUG is definitely not as strong as the SG553, it is considerably easier to learn and control. If you recall, one of the biggest drawbacks to the SG553 is that, in addition to its relatively high recoil, the SG has an almost inverse pattern to most other assault rifles, making it rather troublesome for many players to adjust to. In contrast, the AUG spray pattern is very similar to that of the M4A4s, and in addition has a much more manageable recoil while both scoped and unscoped. So, while normally I would advocate tap firing with scoped assault rifles like the SG553, I find that you can actually burst or even spray at mid to longer ranges with minimal practice, since the gun behaves so similarly to the M4A4. In fact, because the AUG is actually quite usable while unscoped, it produces somewhat more utility in CQC scenarios, as scoping in does obscure overall vision. Personally, I tend to mostly shoot while scoped in, regardless of range, partly because of habit, but mostly because my stupidly high sensitivity preferences make it much easier for me to quickly switch between targets while scoped in. But for the majority of sane players who use a lower DPI and sensitivity, they should find the AUG much easier to use, as again, unlike the SG553, the AUG's recoil and spray pattern makes it much easier to control all around. However, I would still recommend you use the AUG as a mid to long ranged assault rifle, not only for its stats in the scope, but because its 3.8 second reload time is ridiculously long, especially in the heat of a firefight. So much so that, honestly, if you can't finish the job with one magazine, you may want to consider switching to your pistol instead of reloading. On a side note, because I retain the bad habit of quick switching while reloading, which may shorten the animation but not the actual reload time, I find that, unlike most other weapons, the AUG has a rather noticeable time lag difference, from when the switching animation completes to the gun actually being fire ready. So, just be aware that, either way, 3.8 seconds is gonna be 3.8 seconds. On a more positive note, the AUG absolutely crushes at holding more passive, distanced angles. You know, spots where you can abuse its effective range and miscellaneous cover to buy yourself some time for your teammates to rotate in. It's a nice fit to the CT arsenal, considering CT side usually favors defensive play, as most of the time you'll find yourself guarding a bomb site of some sorts. Unfortunately, being a counter-terrorist also means that money is tight, as most weapons and some utilities are just more expensive outright. It may not seem like much, but getting nickel and dimed on weapons, incendiaries, and defusal kits can quickly burn a hole through your wallet. So, although the AUG is only $200 more than both of the CT M4s, when factoring in armor, nades, and a defusal kit, things really start to add up. So, regrettably, because of how expensive the AUG is, and how important money management is on the CT side, I can't really recommend purchasing an AUG. Unless of course you're either confident with the weapon, built up a significant bank, or are holding a specific spot that would benefit greatly from using a scoped assault rifle. Now, I know a few of you may be wondering why I advocate purchasing the SG553 and not the AUG. Well, in summary, money is much easier to come by on the terrorist side.
Fantastic times.
No, it's much more two-sided now.
Okay.
16-0.
The whole world is, mate.
Oh.
What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
What is
Okay.
wrong with you?
Wow.
Along with cheaper weapons and utility, securing a bomb plant will net the terrorist team an extra $800 regardless of the outcome of the round. In addition, for only $3,000, the incredible accuracy and lethality provided by the SG553 is, in my opinion, a steal, seeing that it's still $100 cheaper than any CT M4. But enough about the SG. In conclusion, the AUG really is just like a scoped M4A4, barring some statistical trade-offs, of course. Its recoil and spray pattern make it very easy to pick up and use, and it can be very effective at holding most passive angles. While the combination of the AUG's accuracy and damage statistics give it the utility to perform well at most ranges, the absurdly long reload time tends to negate most of the benefits of using it outside of longer ranged engagements. Honestly, that almost 4-second reload time is the main liability holding the AUG back from being a very well-rounded gun, as it definitely limits the weapon's potential as an aggressive retake weapon.
Yes.
On the flip side, the AUG is certainly impressive at ranged defensive play, which should be no surprise granted the addition of its scope and its statistics. But with its costly price tag of $3,300 combined with the overwhelming importance of money management on CT's side, the disadvantages start to outweigh the benefits. Realistically, factoring in for overall utility, the AUG really isn't that much better than either of the CT M4s. The main problem, besides the reload time, is that it just simply isn't strong enough. Now, don't get me wrong, personally I find the AUG to be a ton of fun to use, and as someone who enjoys using scoped assault rifles, I do find myself using it more often than not. Plus, as an added bonus, I've put a fair share of opponents on tilt from using it well. But sadly, without a higher damage output, its lethality rating is barely above that of the M4s, and nowhere near the SG553s. But enough about what I think. What do you think about the AUG? Should it be used more or less? Or does the weapon need a buff before it should be considered as a weapon staple? Well, whatever you think, it's still the most accurate gun in CSGO.